sometimes I wonder, what is it that gives things the posterity, the long legs that they have? Why is it that some things stick around forever and some things don't get as much attention for as long as other people think they deserve? This is not one of my discussion videos, but it sounds like a concept that I've talked about in like 10 other videos. I don't have to like dig into that. Part of me is like, does something have to get adapted to have any sort of legs in the popular culture? Is it because books are so much less popular than they used to be? Like the visual mediums, movies and television have completely usurped the art of books maintaining super relevance in popular culture. Game of Thrones has made those books something that will be talked about for a very long time, or at least they're still being talked about today. I don't think that young kids are going to continue reading Game of Thrones. It's not relevant anymore, but it lasted longer than it should have because of the show. Harry Potter became the thing that it was because not only was it one of the biggest book series, at the time, also the movies allowed it to have these massive long legs. The Hunger Games, Twilight, these are things that became cultural phenomenon, not just because they were popular books, but also because they got popular adaptations that increased the size of the fandom. The subject I want to talk about today is probably obvious because of the title of this video, but I just want to sit a minute and talk about the Lunar Chronicles and how, best as I can tell, this was a huge phenomenon for bookish people back in the day. A certain type of YA fandom was at a super high, and this was when the Lunar Chronicles came out, and it seems like a lot of people built a lot of hype around this series, and at this point, I don't really see that many people talking about the Lunar Chronicles ever. I don't know if it's one, because they're old, two, because they were big enough that everybody that would care about the series has already read it, or three, it just didn't get an adaptation, so people forgot about it. But I think that is a little bit of a crime. I honestly, looking at the Lunar Chronicles in 2022, I'm wondering why the frick this series did not get an adaptation, because it's hecka fun and super cool. We will start with this premise that I am not super familiar with the concept of fairy tale retellings outside of some like Disney type movies, but like not even just like the regular Disney movies. I'm talking like Ella Enchanted or something, or like a parody like The Princess Bride. But the Lunar Chronicles has put in me this curiosity about the idea of fairy tale retellings, because I think that what Marissa Meyer accomplishes in this quadrilogy, there's a novella, there's a lot of short stories as well. I think that what Marissa Meyer's accomplished in this series is making something that is accessible content-wise. It's not overly explicit in its language or the way that it portrays themes or dark subject matter. It still has YA elements in strong force. It still has a tone that makes it feel like a YA book instead of an adult book. And some of that is due to its younger friendly nature. Additionally, it has the romance idea in spades. So if you can't stand romance in your fantasy and that's something that turns you off of YA, this series may have a lot of parts that bother you. But for those who it doesn't bother you, or for those for who it's a draw, if you have not read the Lunar Chronicles, I don't know why you're sitting on it. I don't know why I sat on it as long as I did. I started this series a long time ago. I read Cinder, I want to say 2 years ago. It took me months to read the second book, Scarlet, but I have binged the second half of that series in like the last 2 weeks because it's so freaking good and freaking fun. And like I said, I can't believe other people are not talking about this still. Some of the stuff I'm about to talk about here in this section may just be common within the idea of fairy tale retellings, because like I said, I haven't really experienced that many of them. I don't know how well they're normally handled, but they are so cool in this series. Each of the books in the Lunar Chronicles focuses on a different specific fairy tale character, and it explores that fairy tale's character in the context of this greater, larger fantasy / science fiction world. I make the joke all the time that fantasy and science fiction are just two sides of the same coin. This book, I think, explores that really well. Like, it is science fiction in the way that there are spaceships and there is technology, but also it's like science fantasy because there's basically magic, and it's a magic system that's fleshed out a lot more than you might think in something that feels like it is so friendly to younger ages. I think the idea of the magic system is something that has enough bounds and there's enough story elements that limits the way it will be used or whatever. I think it's super well handled, and for something that feels so friendly towards potentially young readers, I think the plot is actually significantly more complex than you might think. This is like a super good transition book from middle grade to YA, or YA to, like, if you want to start getting into epic fantasy, you want to explore the idea of a multi-POV story. This is an excellent transition book for doing that, but that is not to discredit it, because I am the type of person who likes to read adult epic fantasy, and I still thought it was freaking fun. While parts of it can be predictable, and yes, there are these younger elements, and there are these romances that feel really fairy tale-esque, I still think there's like super good character work and super interesting plot work, and there's enough moving pieces, and it's so well executed. And when you tie in the fun element of taking in the fairy tale pieces and figuring out how they work and what pieces are, like, what she's going to twist to make the fairy tale story both like have its original elements, but also be able to put these original elements into the greater context of this original science fiction scenario she has set up. Marissa Meyer is like low-key probably going to be one of my favorite YA authors, maybe one of my favorite authors, if I really like the rest of her bibliography as much as I like the Lunar Chronicles. I'm super interested to check out like her Renegade series, her other standalone fairy tale retellings, because it's really, really good the way that she just nails everything here. So for context, if you are familiar with this series, there are the 4 main books: Cinder, Scarlet, Cress, and Winter, and then between Cress and Winter, there's actually a novella called Fairest. There's also a short story collection which contains short stories that take place all throughout this series. I still plan on reading that, but I have not yet. I believe there's an epilogue as one of those short stories. So for context, I have not read that yet. Please don't spoil that in the comments down below. What I will say is Fairest is a book that is a novella that's placed between books 3 and 4. It technically probably is not required reading for this series, but the way that Meyer handles this story that's technically a prequel. I'm going to sit here and say that I am the type of person that normally hates prequels. I think that they are almost impossible to pull off. I've seen almost no prequels that I actually enjoyed. Rogue One, the Star Wars movie, is maybe one of the few exceptions. And I think my problem with prequels is probably better like discussed at large in another video, but it has to do with the fact that like if it's a prequel, then likely you know every single piece that's going to happen. And that's still true about Fairest, but for some reason it breaks all of my normal problems with prequels, and I think it's so expertly crafted. It is my favorite prequel I've ever experienced. In movies, books, television shows, anything, Fairest is the best prequel I've ever seen. It fleshes out one of the characters that you know and you think you know a lot about them in a way that's just crazy. It's crazy. It's captivating. It brings a whole new twist to the series. It changes the tone up because the tone of these books is mostly positive, and Fairest gives a really dark mirror perspective to everything that is, oh, it's so good. And the way that it is this mirror perspective and the way that it does mirror the general tone, it mirrors the plot elements while you get to see the truth of other things that you think you understood. It feels like something that handled poorly would just feel like a stupid retcon. But here it feels like it was part of everything the whole time. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm assuming Marissa Meyer had this in her head the whole time and she chose to write it, and it's so good. On Goodreads, there's a lot of people that don't like it because the tone is so different. On Goodreads, there's also a lot of people where it's their favorite book in this series because the tone is so dark. I think that the balance between Fairest and the rest of this series is just, it's mastercraft. It's mastercraft science fiction fantasy that is acceptable to younger people. Though if you're super young, Fairest is freaking dark. And while I said it's not the most explicit book, the implicit things that happen in Fairest, content warnings, trigger warnings, etc. Now, I've sort of been hinting at this, but I want to say it directly. One of the strengths of this is not just that I think she handles all of her characters really well. I loved all of them. I loved hearing about all their backstories. I was genuinely invested in all of their plights when they were in danger, etc. But one of the best elements of this is the fact that they all tie together into the same story, into the story that's so much bigger and cooler. Like, yes, it is a fairy tale thing where each of the characters get their own fairy tale story, and it's based on regular fairy tales, and you get to see all of these elements of the original stories tied in. But on top of that, there is just this really, really cool original tale woven, spun throughout. And it somehow maintains the whimsy of feeling like a fairy tale, but also feel like something more, but also still be something that I feel like younger readers are allowed to experience. It's not just so full of darkness and explicit content that you wouldn't want younger readers to read. But like I said, it still worked for me. And while it is something that is still younger people friendly, there is a lot of good people and bad people stuff. There are still interesting moral conundrums that the characters come across that they still have to deal with that are some real tough situations. This isn't just your Jedi and Sith story. There are some real interesting gray areas as well. Within those gray areas, we get to see characters that we like make bad decisions, or characters that we don't like we come to understand. Even characters that we think might be mustache twirling villains. Yes, they're super evil, but we get to understand some sympathetic reasons why they might be that way. And of course, it's one of those where it's like, dang, I kind of understand, but you're still bad. Like, it's like that kind of story. But there's multiple characters throughout the series that have that level of depth, on top of there also just being characters that are super good that we can look up to. It's a YA book focused on teens, so there's a lot of romances. The romances could be hit or miss for you. I tend to be a perpetual shipper. I enjoyed all of the major romances in the story. And the romance that happens in Fairest, very interesting, captivating. Good? Question mark? There's a ton of different female leads that all have different interesting strengths. One of my book friends, Bookborn, whose video I will link down below, has a really interesting video talking about the right way, in her opinion, to handle strong female characters. This series, I think, is an excellent example of tons of different examples of how to do that correctly. You have strong female characters of tons of different backgrounds with tons of different strengths and weaknesses, all of them super interesting, and all of them, in my opinion, super well handled throughout the world, like completely. But on top of the female characters, you also have really cool male leads as well, who all of them are put in these really fun scenarios, really dark scenarios, really high intensity scenarios. I have a lot of praise for this series. It sounds like I'm kind of gushing, because I am. I've been hooked on the Lunar Chronicles for the last 2 weeks, just binging the last 3 books. And maybe the craziest thing about it is, because I'm so late to the game, and because this is a series that hasn't had legs, I'm just astonished that more people aren't talking about it. And I want to use this opportunity that if you are watching my channel and you have not read the Lunar Chronicles, but anything I've said sounds interesting to you, you should go check it out. There's a lot of things I want to say, but because I'm not sure that many people that I know personally have read it, I don't want to spoil things. When I joined BookTube, Marissa Meyer was getting talked about some because of the Renegades trilogy, which I think is about superheroes. I'm curious, should I read the Renegades trilogy? I'm really curious to check out Marissa Meyer's other works. I'm dead serious. I know last year, near the end, she released Gilded, which was a fairy tale retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, which I already think is a super cool story. I would love to check that one out. Have you guys read it? Do you like it? Have you read the Lunar Chronicles? Did you like it very much? Did you like it as much as I did? I know that for people that watch my channel, especially because a lot of people have found my channel through Stormlight, this series may not appeal to everyone, but I think if people approach it with an open mind, if the things that I've said sound interesting, I think there's a lot of fun to be had with this series. It's easier paced and more lighthearted. It's easier to get through than a lot of the super dense stuff sometimes I bog down this channel and myself with. But I don't think that's a negative. I think there is certainly a place for that. I want to reiterate, I don't know why this was never adapted. I don't think it needs an adaptation, because we've talked about this before. I rarely think that adaptations are very good, but But I do wish that more people were continuing to talk about the Lunar Chronicles. I wish the legs would still be there, like there are legs for some of the other fantasy series that continue to be talked about even when they're finished. I want Lunar Chronicles to be continued in that discussion. Maybe I just am in the wrong circles of BookTube. It's entirely possible since I mostly am surrounded by adult fantasy types, though I have friends who don't read very much adult fantasy at all. A quick negative, just in passing, there are some times when certain things happen in the series that do feel a little bit convenient, like sometimes happens in a fairy tale. There's one instance specifically where there is an event that takes place that seems so uncannily unrealistic that it would happen the way that it did take me out of it for a little bit, but overall these were small pieces in the greater puzzle that I obviously greatly enjoyed, though there are some convenient things that happen to move the plot forward. Generally, these relate to how characters will get separated and then come back together. Sometimes the reasons they're separated and come back together feel contrived, like everything feels contrived, but they feel like a little more contrived, like the hand of the author's guiding it, and you sometimes, if you're an older reader experiencing it, feel a little bit drawn out. But like I said, it obviously did not affect my enjoyment of the greater overall story. Right now I am experiencing that, like, well, I just finished a series. I'm going to miss these characters. I wish there was more with these characters. You know what I'm talking about? When you finish a series and you're like, I'm going to miss these people. That's how I feel right now about the Lunar Chronicles. The only way that I know to continue living with these characters is to hear other people who love this series continue to experience it and tell me all of their thoughts as they do so. I would love that. So at any point, if you're reading the Lunar Chronicles and you're aware of this video, please just DM me your thoughts, dump them in Discord, send them to my Instagram, to my Twitter. I'll accept your reactions to the Lunar Chronicles at any point, open invitation. I'm recommending the Lunar Chronicles to anyone to whom the things that I've mentioned sound good and the flaws that I've mentioned don't sound that bad. If you like this video or if you like the Lunar Chronicles, please remember to click the like button down below this video. If you'd like to see more videos from me in the future, please click the subscribe button. If you hit the bell, you'll get notified every time I post a new video. If you want to talk about the Lunar Chronicles or Marissa Meyer or anything else, there's a Discord link down below. Anybody can join it. Please do. I cannot wait to see you again in another video. Please come back again. I love you so much. Goodbye.
Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.